We'll leave that there. We are live to Canberra, where the opposition leader is speaking.
Enormously important work you do in this day and age. We need good thinking. We need people who are doing that policy work. That is all important for this great nation. So we appreciate that. It is good to be here with the former Prime Minister, John Howard, who, of course, is a great advocate of good immigration policy, which I'll be talking about today. And to my federal colleagues here today, John O'Duniam, of course, Shadow for Home Affairs, who's been out in the media this morning with me, Sarah, Jess, Dave, who is in the immigration portfolio, of course, and also important to what I'm talking about today. Great to have all of you here. And thank you to all of you who are here as well. It's wonderful to have this audience at such short notice. Standing room only at the back, so I do appreciate you being here. Now, today I'm here to announce the first part of the Coalition's Australian Values Migration Plan, and to talk about the upcoming budget and some of the economic issues we face there. But before I turn to that, it's important to set some context, because this goes to the heart of protecting our way of life and restoring our standard of living that Australians have worked so hard to build over such a long period of time. I want to make 5 observations about recent decades which are shaping our thinking about the key issues our country faces. I make these observations not to criticise past governments of either colour, including past coalition governments to which I belonged. After all, governments are a product of their times. They act and respond to the circumstances in front of them. And Australian governments of recent decades all made policies for a very different world, indeed a more benign world than we face today. And in the main, they delivered prosperity for Australians. Of course, they didn't get everything right, and the frustration of many Australians today about some past decisions is both understandable and reasonable. To paraphrase a Danish philosopher, we live forwards, but we understand backwards. So I make these observations with humility, with the wisdom afforded by hindsight, of course, and with a view to our present predicaments, with a resolve to course correct. Observation 1. Past governments welcomed the benefits of globalisation, but they were less attuned to the risks. Today's fuel crisis reinforces the fragility of global supply chains and the folly of allowing our sovereign industries to be hollowed out where those industries are of strategic importance. The obvious example is liquid fuels. And that's why when I was Energy Minister, we established a minimum stockholding obligation and saved the last 2 refineries from closing. Perhaps we should never have got to that point, but that's what we did achieve at the end of the last government. Observation 2. Past governments rested comfortably behind the security conferred by American predominance. Today, in a different age where events are being shaped much more by the sword and the shield, in a time when we can't just free ride off the generosity of our friends, Australia finds itself poorly equipped to defend and deter. Observation 3. Past governments blindly repeated mantras about Australia being the world's most successful multicultural society and diversity being our strength. Such doctrines saw us open our borders to people who, far from wanting to join and contribute to Australia, have wanted to take from Australia and even change Australia to suit them. Observation 4. Past governments moved away from energy pragmatism and embraced energy ideology. Consequently, energy prices have surged and costs across the economy have skyrocketed. Labor's net zero obsession is one of the most economically destructive ideas foisted upon the Australian people, and that is why we have rejected it. Observation 5. The pandemic required a national response, yet National Cabinet became a means for some state governments to normalise heavy-handed intervention. Moreover, with many Australians reliant on government in that crisis, we inadvertently animated a belief that bigger government is the solution to every problem. That belief was seized upon by Anthony Albanese and helped propel Labor to power, a point I'll return to shortly. In making these 5 observations, I want to send a message of reassurance to Australians. The Liberal Party and the Coalition has learned from history. Under my leadership, we will change for the better. We will deliver policies for the change our nation needs because our country must change for the better. Now, however, after almost 4 years of governing, it's clear the Albanese government is incapable of delivering the change that is needed for our country. Labor has no long-term plan for our fuel security. Labor is ideologically opposed to unlocking our natural resources and building our sovereign capabilities. Labor's devotion to net zero and economy-crippling carbon taxes on vehicles, on manufacturing, on electricity is driving industries offshore. And despite today's announcement, Labor has done little to properly fund and build missiles and drones at speed and scale, which is absolutely critical for our defence. Nor has it increased defence spending as a share of the economy. Labor's also opened up the migration floodgates, bringing in a record 3.4 million people in just 3.5 years, putting extreme pressure on housing, on infrastructure and on services. Now, here's the truth. Bigger government and a big Australia has not meant a better Australia or Australians being better off. Australians have experienced the biggest fall in living standards in the developed world since Labor came to power. Our inflation is worse than every other major advanced economy. Jim Chalmers blames everyone but himself for Australia's inflation and high interest rates. But Australians aren't mugs. They know our inflationary and high interest rates environment is stubborn and was increasing before the conflict in the Middle East. They know Labor has a dangerous addiction to spending, which as a proportion of the economy is at a 40-year high outside of the pandemic. Moreover, government debt will soon exceed $1 trillion for the first time. $1 trillion. Growth in the economy is an illusion. Every single dollar of growth under the Albanese government has been due to population growth, mostly immigration. From my first day as leader, I set 2 core priorities: to restore Australians' standard of living and to protect our way of life. That means shifting away from Labor's government-directed economy back to a free enterprise economy. Big government is not the solution for Australia. We need better government that gets the big things right. Better government that gets off Australians' backs and puts faith back in Australians. The coalition I lead has a freedom agenda at its core. I want workers to be freer, paying less tax. I want businesses to be freer, liberated from the reams of government paperwork that turn ambition into anxiety. Paperwork that turns ambition into anxiety. I want industries to be freer, unencumbered by roadblocks, so that we can make more onshore instead of seeing manufacturing going offshore. I want Australians to be freer by eradicating the nanny state and giving Australians more choice. So it's this freedom that will revive the conditions, the confidence, the choices and the investment needed for a new era of prosperity in Australia. There's been lots of talk in recent times about protection, but let me tell you, the best way to protect businesses and industries isn't with bailouts and handouts. They're nothing more than band-aids. The best way to protect businesses and industries is getting government out of the way. The best way to revitalise and reindustrialise our economy is by getting the big things right, by removing crippling taxes, by removing or reducing choking regulation, and by restoring cheaper power. It's these 3 things that will make everything across the economy cheaper to grow, to make, to build, to fix and to service. It's these 3 things that are absolutely central to the Coalition's economic agenda. Now, restoring our standard of living and protecting our way of life is also about immigration. and for the remainder of this speech, I want to focus on this important topic. It's an issue of deep and growing concern to Australians. We have an incredibly proud history of welcoming migrants from across the world to Australia. People who have assimilated, worked hard, built families, helped to build and defend our nation, and become cherished and loyal citizens. My grandfather, William Hudson, was the Commissioner and Chief Engineer of the Snowy Mountain Hydro Scheme from the late 50s through to the close to completion. He saw firsthand the success of migrants who came to this country, who embraced its values and were committed to building a great Australia. Growing up near Cooma in the 1970s, I witnessed this extraordinary success story firsthand. We need to preserve this ethos that underpins our immigration program and a great Australia. And something, unfortunately, has changed in recent times. Immigration numbers are too high, and consequently Australians can see the country they love changing for the worse. There's a fact about immigration as old as history that we seldom speak about. When a country brings in too many people, and the people with the wrong motivations, it's inevitable that the character of the country changes. Parts of the UK and Europe are now wrestling with this reality after a period of sustained mass immigration that started in 2015. Here in Australia, a YouGov poll in January found that 64% of Australians want lower immigration. Moreover, a Fox and Hedgehog poll in February found that 59% of first-generation migrants want immigration to be cut back. Just think about that for a moment. There is a strong backlash to immigration even amongst those from migrant backgrounds. Now, broadly speaking, migrants fall into two categories. There's those of noble and patriotic intent. Someone who wants to become Australian, embrace Australia and contribute to Australia. And overwhelmingly, the vast majority of people who come to this great country fall into that category. And then there is the migrant of subversive intent. Someone who rejects our way of life, who doesn't want to change for Australia and wants Australia to change for them, who's here for transactional reasons and transactional intent. And worse, declining immigration standards have seen our door open to migrants of subversive intent. Consider what we've seen in recent years. The Bondi Beach terrorist attack. Radical Islamic preachers espousing hate with impunity. Genocidal marches in major cities. Anti-Semitism across Australian communities. These are the ramifications of an immigration system where standards have eroded. Indeed, just this month, Labor deported one Islamic hate preacher and cancelled the visa of another offshore, having granted visas to both. Australians are rightly concerned, but not only about our door being open to the purveyors of hate and violence. Our door has been open to people who, while rejecting hate and violence, nevertheless still reject our core values. People who don't believe in equal rights for men and women. People who don't believe in the rule of law and want to establish parallel legal systems. People who don't believe in freedom of speech, association and religion. And in recent times, of course, that has included Islamist extremists. For too long, we've turned a blind eye to the reality of immigration and integration. Those who migrate from liberal democracies have a greater likelihood of subscribing to Australian values compared to those coming from other places, ruled by fundamentalists, extremists and dictators. And in that vein, the Gazan cohort of 1,700 people here on visas presents a high risk to our nation. That cohort must be reassessed entirely with far greater scrutiny. The Director-General of Security has also been upfront about the growing threat of foreign interference in Australia. Our door has been open to people who, far from having an allegiance to Australia, are actively working against our nation. People intimidating migrant communities. People trying to undermine our democracy. People sowing social discord. All this stems from an immigration system where standards have eroded. So, ladies and gentlemen, Australia has a non-discriminatory immigration program. We don't discriminate based on nationality, race, gender or faith. But for an immigration program to work in the national interest, it must discriminate based on values. We must dispense with the naive thinking that has dominated our immigration policy for too long. Our nation has paid the price for believing that anyone from anywhere will embrace our way of life. Not everyone wanting to migrate to Australia has a noble intent. Not everyone wanting to migrate to Australia will be a net benefit to Australia. Indeed, some will be a net drain. Not everyone who wanting to migrate to Australia will integrate with the rest of our great country. And just as energy policy under Labor is dominated by the ideology of net zero, immigration policy under Labor is dominated by the ideology of cultural relativism. For Labor, all immigration is good immigration. But that is simply not true. It's not what Australians are seeing with their own eyes. And Australians are fed up with politically correct preaching on immigration. Looking to parts of the UK and Europe, Australians see the erosion of national culture and the balkanisation of communities that has come from immigration policies that have not prioritised values. Indeed, Australians are worried we're on the same disastrous road as those parts of the world, and they want change. And the Coalition is determined to deliver change for the better. So today I'm pleased to announce the first part of our immigration policy. I'm going to focus on our Australian Values Migration Plan, which is just one part of a broader agenda, which will include bringing the numbers down to a sustainable level. But today we're proudly going to put Australian values at the heart of immigration policy. And there's three key pillars of our policy to lift immigration standards. First, putting Australian values first. Second, shutting the door to people who abuse our immigration system. And third, showing the red light to radicals. So I'll discuss each pillar in turn. At present, people applying for a visa must sign the Australian Values Statement. The values include respecting freedom of speech, association and faith, a commitment to the rule of law and democracy, acting with tolerance, upholding equal opportunity. Yet we've seen too many instances of visa holders flouting those values. Visa holders who have broken the law instead of abiding by it. Visa holders who have peddled intolerance and intimidated others instead of respecting individual freedom. For some visa applicants, signing the Australian Values Statement has simply become a tick box exercise without any intent to comply with those values. They're taking us for a ride. The Coalition will make the Australian Values Statement a legally binding and enforceable visa condition for all temporary and permanent visa holders. With this stronger rulebook, there will be no more ambiguity in courts and tribunals. In short, if a visa holder undermines our democratic values, doesn't respect the law, or doesn't demonstrate respect for those core values, they will be booted out of Australia. Furthermore, there have been instances where long-standing non-citizens have been allowed to stay in Australia despite committing offences that warrant visa cancellation. They have been permitted to stay because of their period of residency or other reasons. But time and ties are no testament to loyalty to Australia. We're going to close this leniency loophole. If a long-standing non-citizen hasn't demonstrated Australian values, they will be booted out of Australia. A centrepiece of the Australian Values Statement is that English is our national language. English is necessary to live, to work and integrate into Australian society. And I talked earlier about the Snowy Scheme, Cooma. After the war, people who came to the country at that time, they learnt English. The Coalition will make learning English an obligation for permanent visa holders, not an option. Central to these values is that citizenship is about privilege. It's not a handout. And permanent residency must reflect that same expectation, a genuine commitment to Australia demonstrated through contribution, integration and respect for our values. That principle must also extend to how we allocate taxpayer-funded support. And that's why I'm appalled by revelations in recent weeks that nearly 50,000 non-citizens have used Labor's first home buyer 5% deposit scheme. Labor opened this scheme to permanent residents in 2023. But such a loan scheme, financed by the Australian taxpayer, should be reserved for Australian citizens. The Coalition will close off this scheme to anyone but Australian citizens. And this is just the start. We'll look closely at further measures to reserve key social and economic entitlements for Australian citizens, and we'll have more to say about that in due course. Let me turn to the second pillar of our policy, shutting the door to people who abuse our immigration system. On Labor's watch, we've seen an explosion in the number of unlawful non-citizens on our soil. Some 65,000 people remain here despite their student or protection visas being cancelled and despite having exhausted all avenues for appeal. Our immigration system is being exploited by people using the pretext of needing protection to stay here for economic reasons. The Coalition will crack down on overstayers with several measures. First, we'll create a safe country list to end frivolous protection claims. Countries on this list would be those deemed generally free from persecution. If a citizen of a safe country applies for a refugee and humanitarian visa from outside Australia, it will be assumed to be inadmissible. And if a citizen of a safe country is in Australia and makes a protection claim, their application can be expected to be refused and their deportation fast-tracked. To those who say we'll be in breach of the Refugee Convention, we'll decide who deserves protection and the circumstances in which that protection is granted. It's time to take back control from the technocrats, the bureaucrats and the activists. To stop the abuse of our immigration system, the Coalition will also restore temporary protection visas to their previous role. These visas were a successful deterrence measure introduced by the Coalition that curtailed cheating of our immigration system. Temporary protection visas should never have been scaled back by Labor. The prospect of permanent protection encourages abuse of the system. And by getting rid of that incentive, we'll send a clear message that bogus claims of persecution will never be a pathway to permanency. We're also going to oust the overstayers. We'll establish a joint agency task force to kick unlawful overstayers out of the country. They are not welcome if they have seen all the avenues to appeal exhausted and they no longer have a visa. Our objective is very simple. If you do the wrong thing, we'll keep you out or we'll kick you out. You will be deported. And we're not going to tolerate overstayers who refuse to hop off the appeals merry-go-round despite being told they have no legal right to stay in Australia. In that vein, we're going to stop non-citizens accessing and using taxpayer-funded aid as well. Now, let me turn to the third pillar of our policy, showing a red light to radicals. The Coalition will establish an enhanced security screening centre. Using the full suite of intelligence, screening and enforcement capabilities, the centre will stop radicals, extremists and terrorists from entering our country. As part of the enhanced screening process, all visa applicants will be required to provide social media accounts when applying for a visa. The Coalition's resolve is clear. The door will be shut for those who want to import the hatred and violence of other places to Australia. There must never be another tragedy like we saw at Bondi Beach. Ladies and gentlemen, putting Australian values at the heart of immigration policy is absolutely crucial to protecting our way of life. But to protect our way of life and to restore Australian standard of living, we also need to reduce immigration numbers drastically. That's something Labor will never do, and we will. But the starting point is building our migration on a foundation of Australian values and higher standards. This is worth fighting for because Australia is worth fighting for. Thank you very much.
Opposition leader Angus Taylor speaking in Sydney there at the Menzies Research Centre, outlining the elements of the Coalition's immigration policy. And he said there that there are 3 pillars to, as he put it, lift the standards, which are putting Australians first, shutting out people who abuse the immigration system and showing a red light to radicals. Now, he will be taking questions. Let's go back to that now.
Thank you, Mr Howard, as well, for everything that you do for the Menzies Research Centre. Our greatest supporter of the Menzies Research Centre wouldn't exist without Mr Howard's work, another part of your great legacy. Thank you, Angus, for that speech. A few things I want to press you on. I've got some questions here from our audience as well, so we'll try and weave all of those in. Starting with your grandfather, who I didn't realise was instrumental in the Snowy Hydro scheme. That was a time when Australia's migration program had a purpose. This great flood of post-war migration, they were helping build the nation. We provided them homes, we provided them jobs. And there was just this clear purpose as to what our migration program was seeking to do. How would you describe the purpose over the last few years, in particular, of the migration program in Australia? And how would that purpose change under a Taylor government?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. Can I say, growing up in the 70s in the Snowies in near Cooma, I saw the legacy of that extraordinary program. If any of you go to the park at Cooma, you'll see flags from all the countries where the workers came from around the park. And it was, we just thought this was normal. We thought it was normal. But I can tell you that those people loved this nation as much as any Australian I've ever met, because they had left war-torn Europe, they knew what they were leaving, and they knew what an incredible place they had come to, and they embraced it. They embraced everything. They didn't always embrace our food, but we got to eat great. We got to have great cappuccinos and eat great food at a time when there was less of that around Australia. But they are and were and are, and there's less of them around now, obviously, than there were back then. Great Australians. That is the immigration program we've got to get back to. What has happened? The standards have got too low. The numbers have got too high. And we haven't said to people coming to this country, the privilege of being Australian means you've got to adopt our values. That's what we haven't done. And that's what we have to do now, and that's what the speech was all about. And it's inspired by my personal experience, but also, I think, experience of so many other Australians with what good immigration looks like and what not so good looks like, which is what we've seen in the last 4 years under Labor. The numbers are just unbelievable. I mean, over 500,000 in a year. That is bigger than the size of Canberra in a single year. And the housing has not kept up. It has not kept up. And we wonder why young Australians can't buy a home. So it's got to change, and it will change under a coalition government.
Thank you, Angus. We'll get to housing, which is an important issue. Firstly, you touched on the Bondi massacre as a focal point. Before the Bondi massacre, 86% of Australians said that Australia is a divided country. 86% of Australians think we live in a divided country, and that was before Bondi. What do you think is driving this division, this sentiment, this lack of social cohesion? And you mentioned positive reforms through the migration program to seek to address this. But do you think the problem is much wider? And will you look at our institutions, our education system as well, to rectify this and ensure we're a more cohesive society like we were under Mr Howard?
Yeah, I mean, can I say I think the heart of it, we've stopped celebrating our great nation. The fact that it's been controversial to stand only in front of Australian flags is just extraordinary to me. And we've got to get back to celebrating our country and asking people who come to our country and want to become citizens of our country to celebrate it as well. It's not perfect. Our history is not perfect, but we love it warts and all. And we've got to celebrate it. Now, that celebration shouldn't just be in the way we conduct our immigration policy. It should be across the board. And again, that's what you will see. You'll continue to see from me when I stood up the first time as leader of the coalition. I think I had 6 flags in front of me. Tony Abbott said there's nowhere near enough. It needs to be 10. I think he got up to 10. But it is about celebrating what we are, what we've achieved, learning from our mistakes, and we've made them. And I talked about some of our mistakes today. And I think we need to see much more of that.
Thank you, Angus. A line I think the media will be repeating tonight from your speech: we won't discriminate based on countries, but we will discriminate on the basis of Australian values. What do you mean by that in practice? Because, of course, we've got a lot of good people that reside in non-liberal democracies and, of course, some not so good people that reside in liberal democracies. So can you just expand on that point and how that will work in practice?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we'll always have a reasonable debate in this country about what an Australian fair go means and those sorts of things, and that's all up for debate, and we want that contest. But some aspects of our country should be beyond that kind of debate when it comes to who we bring into the country. If you don't respect democracy, I'm not sure why you would want to come here. If you don't accept our rule of law, again, I don't think it's right for you. There might be other places in the world, but not here. And if you don't believe in our basic freedoms of speech, of religion, of association, again, this is not the country for you. These are not, I don't think these are high bars. I think these are the sorts of thresholds most Australians will say, that's pretty reasonable. I certainly think so. Frankly, most people who do come to this country do accept those things. And they want those things. In fact, they're running away from the opposite. This is the story I told earlier about the post-war immigration, but people were running away from the opposite. That's why they came here. And they were running away from a war-torn Europe where they had seen regimes that were not democratic, that didn't respect the rule of law, that didn't accept basic freedoms. So I think asking for people to support those things is not a big ask, but it hasn't been a focus for our immigration policy in recent years.
I see a lot of heads nodding, so I think there's a lot of support in this room for what you've just said. Just on housing, Angus, we've got net overseas migration of around 300,000 a year, sometimes higher, sometimes slightly lower. But we build around 170,000 new homes every year. Some economists have said that you can fix the housing crisis in Australia without touching immigration. Now that seems to be a fantasy, looking at the reality over the last few years. Is the migration program going to be one of the key levers that you'll look to pull to address housing?
Yeah, I think there's got to be balance. There's got to be balance. So to put this in perspective, Labor has seen immigration numbers, the norm, net overseas migration, sitting on about 90,000 above their own targets. Above their own targets, over 300,000. It's going up now, not down. Historically, it was closer to 200,000. And yet housing has been about 70,000 below their own targets. I mean, it just doesn't work. And it's pretty basic supply and demand. If the demand is too high and the supply is too low, what's going to happen to housing in this country? Affordability will go down, prices will go up. And that's what's happened. And it has to be fixed. Now, you can have a debate about whether Labor's targets would have got it back into balance. It certainly would have got closer. But it doesn't matter because they haven't even got close to their targets. They've completely failed. And in fact, it's so bad that the Treasurer was out a couple of weeks ago saying, actually, I've given up on that lower immigration target. I'm now going to accept it's going to be higher. Well, it's got to be fixed. and we'll say more about some of those details in the coming months.
Thanks, Angus. One of the factors that's been driving these record migration numbers has been a significant increase in temporary migration. We've got to the point now where 10% of the population in Australia are here on temporary visas. And of course, if you're here on a temporary visa, your status is temporary, there's not that same incentive to fully embrace Australian society, culture and our values. One of the main subcategories that's been driving this increase in temporary migration has been students, the biggest subcategory. And we've got a number of our students through our Future Leaders program here today. One of the issues they keep telling us is through research, in which we've done some work on, is looking at this significant increase of international students to the point where Sydney University, Melbourne University are approaching 50% enrolments, international students, and that's changed the culture at the universities, it's changed the teaching standards at the universities as well because of the English language requirements. How will you balance education as an export and an important export and an important way to derive funding for our higher education institutions that are some of the best in the world, with this problem, of course, these international students all require homes to live in, and it is changing the nature of our university campuses. How will you balance that?
Yeah, so if you want to get immigration back to a sustainable level, there's no question that one of the key categories that's driving that has been international students. And you're right to say that Sydney University in particular, but also Melbourne University, has approached very close to 50%, and mostly undergraduates, but some graduates as well, but a very high weighting of undergraduates, which is unusual by standards of many of the great universities of the world. And I think it's done two things. One is it's added greatly to the immigration numbers, but second, I think it's eroded the educational experience for domestic Australian students. And I think we've got to get the balance right. Now, we'll say more about that. It's most prevalent amongst the G8, as you pointed out. But there's no, they want to make a bit more money, but if you're eroding the product for domestic students, if the experience of Australian domestic students at these universities is not what it should be, then it needs to be fixed. And so, as I say, we'll have more to say about the norm and the makeup of the various categories down the track, but it is an area of focus.
Thanks, Angus. You really elevated immigration as an issue. We've got some representatives from your front bench here today as well. This is going to be a key focus for you, it seems, over the next 2 years leading up to the election. What are the next pillars of your values migration policy that we're going to hear about over the next year or so?
Yeah, well, I mean, what you've heard about today is a big focus on values, and that will continue to be a focus for us, because I think to have a good immigration policy, first and foremost, you've got to make sure that Australian values are deeply embedded in it. So I don't think you have anything without that. So that's where we start. But we will have more to say about the numbers and the makeup of that immigration over the coming months. I mean, one of the challenges with this is that Labor keeps giving us these numbers as to where it's going to go, and they keep being wrong. And when I say wrong, I mean really wrong. Not even close. And you've got to ask yourself, why have they got it so badly wrong? Frankly, I think their hearts are not in it. They believe in a big Australia with this sort of cultural relativism where all immigration is good immigration. They don't discriminate based on values, and they're not seeking to protect our way of life. When you've got an economy where the only growth is population growth, perhaps that's why, because it's the only way they can boast that the economy is growing. I mean, the economy has grown by 7.5% since Labor got to power. The population, mostly immigration, has grown by 7.5%. It's exactly the same number. And so perhaps that's why they've lost control of immigration, because they've lost control of the economy, they've lost control of our standard of living. And if we're going to restore our standard of living, protect our way of life, we've got to get our immigration back to being focused on Australians first, at a level that's sustainable, and have an economy where people's standard of living, their incomes, their real wages are rising. That's how you get growth. And that's what we'll be focused on.
Thank you, Angus. I'm getting worried about all these people standing at the back, so we might take this opportunity to wrap things up. Thank you all for joining us, Mr Howard in particular. Thanks for your support for the work of the Menzies Research Centre and for what Angus is seeking to achieve here. So please join me again in thanking Angus Taylor.
That was Angus Taylor taking part in a Q&A after delivering his speech on the Coalition's migration policy. Now let's bring in political reporter Stephanie Boris to discuss all of this. Steffi, what are the key elements of the Coalition's immigration policy as outlined there today?
Hi there, Gemma. I think there's two elements to what we heard in this speech. The first is the message that the opposition is trying to get through to voters, and the second is the content of the policy. First of all, around the messaging, we were hearing there from the opposition leader being highly critical of current migration and some of the people coming into Australia. He went so far as to say many of these migrants will be a net drain on society and that they're here for transactional reasons. He believes that the figure is too high. All of that said, though, the opposition is yet to explain just how many migrants it doesn't want in the country anymore. Under the former leader, Peter Dutton, 2 leaders back now before Susan Lee, Peter Dutton talked about reducing the net overseas migration rate by about 100,000. There's no figure yet from this opposition leader. He says that that will come at a later date. Now, in terms of the policies announced today, a couple of elements, Gemma. The first is around Australian values. Angus Taylor was saying if people don't abide by those Australian values, they need to be deported from the country. We don't exactly know how that process will work, but he listed some of those Australian values that are in a statement at the moment that all visa holders do have to sign. That's around things like understanding freedom of religion, understanding our way of, abiding by the laws, and that Australia's main language is English. On that note, he did make a new announcement we hadn't heard about, was that he wants to change the system around how someone can become a permanent resident, and that is that they have to reach a certain level of English. We don't have any details about how exactly this would work or what it would look like. The only comparison that I can give you is one that was done by former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull back in 2017 when they did try and up the English language requirements around citizenship. Now, all of this, Gemma, is the opposition leader is trying to link partly to housing. We know that there is a housing problem in Australia. Groups like One Nation are trying to pin it purely on migrants, and Angus Taylor was partly doing that today, the context around that being, of course, we know that the Coalition is losing votes to One Nation and the Coalition is trying to get some of those voters back. So Angus Taylor today announcing that the housing deposit scheme, where you only need 5% of a deposit to buy a house, he's saying that no longer should that be available to permanent residents, only citizens. You do need to point out, though, Gemma, permanent residents, they are people, living here in Australia. They're working in our hospitals. They're helping build homes. The percentage of permanent residents that have used this scheme to date is around 16%, to give you some figures on that. And just finally, if I may, Angus Taylor was talking about enhanced screening for people applying for visas. So you're having to give over your social media accounts, for example, for authorities to look at. He was talking about setting up an enhanced screening group that would include the AFP, Border Force and the like. Border Force can ask for your phone already when you come into the country to have a look. His argument is this is about trying to have more of a holistic approach with the different authorities, but once again trying to link it to the Bondi attack. That said, the man that was involved in the shooting at Bondi, he was actually born in Australia, so these rules wouldn't have applied to him. His father, he came 30 years ago when social media wasn't a thing. So there are links here where the rhetoric is building around not a full hatred towards migrants, but pointing out that some aren't good. That said, Angus Taylor in the same breath is saying, oh, it's not all of them, it's a small amount. So there's an attempt here to try and win over voters that are going towards One Nation, but also still trying to keep some of those coalition-based supporters that are in places like Western Sydney with a high rate of migration.
Political reporter Stephanie Boris, thank you.